Welcome to the Make an Impact podcast presented by the American Association of Suicidology. I'm Chris Cosentino, and today we're joined by the popular rapper and artist Caskey. Caskey, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Honored.
Listen, I've been playing your music constantly since I knew you were coming on, and it is awesome. There's grit, there's powerful storytelling, there's love, pain. Let's jump right into it.
Yes,
How do we wind up talking to each other today, and what was it that inspired you to make an impact in the suicide prevention community?
Well, I think mental health has kind of always been something that's been at the center of my music and my career. I mean, suicide, ironically, is like the thing that catapulted me into making music. You know, I've always been a music head, and my sister, when I was growing up, had a very eclectic taste, and so I just grew up around a lot of music influence. And I was also kind of like a kid that was smart but wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my life. I lost my dad to suicide when I was 16 years old. I was in high school. And, I've told this story before, but the weird thing that happened the day that I lost him, in the midst of all this like tsunami of pain that I was in, was that I had a song idea come into my head. And it was a really weird thing at the time because you almost feel guilty being inspired. It's a weird word to use surrounding something like that. But as I look back at it in retrospect, it was just the universe or God telling me what to do with my pain. And so since then, I've just always put my pain in my life into music. It's been like the driving force in my life for, half of my life now. And it's been a big thing that's connected me to my fans. And, a big part of my fan base is people that have gone through this or just, care about mental health. I'm not a surface layer artist or, a very materialistic artist or anything like that. That's kind of normalized in rap. I'm a deep one,
Oh, I appreciate that, and like I said, you can hear it in your music. Like I said, that grit, that there's pain there, and love, and one of the things that I read recently was the letter to my father that you had wrote, and you talk about how he's your mentor and how he was your hero, and you didn't have a chance to say goodbye. How did your father have that influence on you? That okay, this is the direction I want to take my life, and become an artist.
A couple of different ways. I mean, I think it just all kids, for the most part, our dad is like this statue superhero in our life. And so he was always that for me. And my dad he wasn't a musician. He was a big sports guy. He was a construction worker. He was just a hardworking dude. And he was big into sports when he was younger. And so I think early in my life, I kind of sought approval from him, trying to do sports, and I wasn't ever really that gifted at them. I was all right. And right about a year before he passed away, I started doing music a little bit. And that was like one of the first times I can like really remember seeing him just lit up with just being happy and inspired and excited that I was into something. And, even after he passed away, I like hit eject in the CD deck of his truck, and my, early mixtape was in there. And so I think that just indirectly has always pushed me. The last couple of months that he was alive, we used to talk about doing music all the time, and he wanted to be a part of it. And I think it's something that he would be blown away if he could see, what I was doing now.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned your dad was a construction worker, and when we look at data, when we look at suicide rates, the suicide rate for amongst construction workers is high. It's among one of the highest rates. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a couple of reasons. I think one, I think people that are in that position, I mean, it's a demanding job. It's something that you work really hard at. I think just like a lot of jobs in America, people work really hard their whole life and then still feel like they can't really get ahead. And, my dad had like a plethora of other issues that really led to, basically what had happened. And this is probably true for a lot of other construction workers, but when I was in third grade, he was injured in a construction accident. He lost the tips of 8 of his fingers. And this was pre-opioid epidemic where people were really aware of like the dangers of Oxycontin and different drugs like that. And so my dad was prescribed Oxycontin, obviously for, he was in this very painful experience. He had to go to rehab for his finger treatment and stuff like that. And over the next, from the time I was in third grade till I was a junior in high school, which is when he died, he used Oxycontin every single day. And so that's the biggest factor to me is really that. And at this time, the country wasn't like super aware of the opioid epidemic and that these were basically heroin in pill form. And so I think there was a culture at the time of like, oh, well, my doctor prescribed this is what I need, this helps me feel good. And by the time you realize that you're addicted to it or you have a problem, it's really too late. And so I think about the timeline that he was on. That was an 8-year addiction. On top of that, he's trying to provide, stay afloat. He was out of work for a while after he lost the tips of his fingers because he was going through lawsuits with the construction company. So there were a lot of elements there. And then also, my dad, he like used drugs with my older sister. It just started, she was 7 years older than me. And so it started out with them just smoking weed together. He was like a weed smoker. He was always kind of like a counterculture dude. He was a biker, and like he was always counterculture. And so I think he didn't see a big deal when my sister was like 15, 16 and started smoking weed, and he just he did that his whole life. And so I think he started joining her in that. And then as his addiction progressed, so did hers. And so I think the biggest factor in him like reaching that point was just this like guilt, because my sister's drug addiction got worse and worse over the years and veered away from his and just got worse in its own direction. And so I think there's a lot of different things, but I think a big part of it is people are trying to provide for their family. The economy's hard. Men tend to not really speak about their emotions or seek help. My dad was from that generation of like, suck it up and get to work.
Yeah, it's one of those things, and that's one of the main reasons, why we wanted to launch this podcast is normalize these conversations. And
Yeah.
and having the opportunity to speak with people in all different walks of life. And when you talk about your career and the things that you've been through that might influence your work, what would you say the biggest change you saw from you in your writing, or maybe the way you looked at music before your father passed away compared to after?
Well, I'd say like before, there wasn't a big change before he passed away, because I think my perception of life was really shallow. It was surface layer. I I had grown up around like my sister's addiction and stuff like, but just for a little context, prior to the year 6 months before my dad passed away, I had no idea that he was addicted to Oxycontin or used drugs. So my just perception of reality was real shallow. Like obviously I'd been through things with my sister being in and out of rehab, but I just think I had this perception of life that missed the whole painful layer. I don't know. That's kind of how I look at it. And so when I made music before, it was just purely for the surface layer component of I enjoy these sounds and but I wasn't saying anything of substance. I don't think I was really a person of substance at that time. And so like the biggest change was losing him, because it just altered everything I thought about life, and it altered the way I cared about music. It altered my purpose, everything. And so when he died, I scrapped all of the music that I had been working on for the year prior, because I was like, this means nothing. So that was the number one thing. And then I'd say the second big turning point for me was like I got sober 4 years ago. And because after I lost my dad, I kind of went on a destructive journey of just my own drug journey and hiding from pain and all the things that we do to numb our experiences. And so 4 years ago I got sober, and then I feel like that was the second big catalyst in just bringing a new layer of depth to my music and clarity. And it was a moment in my career where it kind of crystallized my purpose of what kind of artist I want to be, because I think growing up I idolized a lot of artists that were perpetuating their own pain, like the 27 Club artists, Kurt Cobain and Jimi Hendrix, and lots of rappers that I looked up to that died young. And I look at it, and their art is so important for so many reasons. So I don't mean this to criticize their art in any way, but just that when people don't fix their pain or put a lot of effort to fix their pain, they end up perpetuating it. And so I idolized this troubled artist archetype for a long time. And I think at one point when I got sober, I had this real clarifying moment where I was like, do I want to perpetuate and romanticize being a troubled artist, or do I want to really try to address my pain and do my best to become happy and push the people that listen to my music in that direction? And so I think those were the two defining moments in who I am as an artist.
Yeah, no, I've always appreciated artists that are able to tap into that, and um, whenever it's writing music or art or anything, that I feel it becomes more natural. I feel like it's more authentic. This is
Hmm.
they're pouring their heart out, and I've always said it's probably one of the biggest forms of bravery to share your story on a public platform like that. And I tell you, your music. I mean, it's you can hear it. You can hear it in your music,
Thank you.
and I think that's what makes it so powerful and so successful. And looking back, when when you're coping with that grief, are there things that you regret? Are there things that you might have wanted to do a little bit differently? Are there things that you said, oh, that was pretty good. I could, if someone's going down that road similar that you were on, um, maybe it's a good piece of advice for them.
Yeah, like in a perfect world, I think I would look back and be like, wow, I wish I didn't perpetuate drug use and things like that early on in my career. But I understand that life is like infinitely more complex than that. And even now as an artist, it's like I don't only listen to music that is like sober, positive music. That's just not what I'm into. I like, music that's about street life and drugs and stuff like that. I still listen to that stuff, even though I'm sober and I'm not in that lifestyle anymore. So I think that there's an element there that it's hard for me to understand, but I just accept it, in that sometimes the darker parts of ourselves in our art, they draw in the people that we're meant to talk to. And so a lot of people that have been along for my journey in music, they've gotten sober with me, or they used drugs early on in their career when I was using drugs. And also I think it's a relatability thing of like, I'm personally, I mean, you see what I look like. I know if this is an audio podcast, people might not know, but I'm covered in tattoos. I've done a lot of questionable things in my life, just growing up and hustling and just being a young, stupid kid. And so for me personally, I tend to not really listen to people that don't come from the same cloth or era that I come from, or that haven't walked a similar path. Like, to me, the biggest mentors I've found in life right now, like, one is Wes Watson. He's just a major influence, somebody that's really changed my life, helped me to get sober. He's a tatted up guy that went to prison and likes rap music. And so I feel like I listen to him more because I feel like he can understand my journey. And so when I look back on my past, I try not to, regret it too much, in the sense of like, I know that it was a necessary part of this journey. Obviously I wish that there were things that I didn't do to perpetuate other people's pain. And, when you're selling drugs, you're basically just perpetuating other people's suffering. And so those things I do regret. But in the grander scheme of things, I just understand that they are a part of the story and they're a part of who I'm meant to speak to. And so I try not to judge it too much. Hindsight is 2020, and it's easy for us to be like, I wish I didn't do this, but it's all part of this story that we're meant to tell, and this example we're meant to set.
Yeah, I mean, your music alone, like I said, it's so powerful, and you're pouring your heart out into almost every track. And then when you do see you got all the tattoos. It's I feel like your canvas is your inside and out. and
Yeah.
it's you being you. And it's at what point in your life, and maybe rap wasn't always what you wanted to pursue. Maybe there was other music avenues that might have
Yeah.
influenced you to get going. But at what point were you like, this is what I'm supposed to do?
Well, like early on when I always knew that I wanted to do music. I was really into like metal music and hardcore bands when I was younger. So that was the scene that I was in, like when I was real young. Like I would go to local shows and, you know, all my earliest memories are at metal and hardcore shows. So that was always the scene I thought that I would end up in. And then I wasn't extra talented at instruments and I didn't know the band, just that just never aligned for me. But in high school I discovered Nas. I was already into rap as well, but I discovered Nas, um, who still to this day is like one of the most poetic writers. And I had a love for words. I was always into poetry and writing and just the way words entangle and tell stories in different ways. And so when I discovered Nas, I fell in love with rap. And I was like, this is what I'm meant to do. I just became obsessed with it. And then, I think when I lost my dad, it wasn't like that told me like I got to become a rapper. It was more or less that I was already kind of on that path. And then when I lost my dad, it was like, I don't want to do anything else because if I don't do this, I'm not going to really want to continue with life. Like it was just, that was such a painful time for me that like music was the only thing that gave me a sort of like glimmer of hope to move forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's you're thrown into this world of suicide, this world of mental health at such a young age. And I'm curious, as an artist, when you're touring and you just got off some incredible tour dates from across the country, and I'm curious to know, what do you do as a touring artist to manage your mental health, to make sure that, because listen, you're traveling, your schedule is inconsistent, you're in different
Yeah.
city almost every day, multiple shows a week, physically, mentally, emotionally, that's a draining situation. How do
Oh
you
yeah.
manage your mental health in your profession?
Couple different ways. Number one was getting sober because it's impossible to balance. I mean, I tell you, I toured for, you know, from the time I was like 19 turning 20, and then I got sober 4 years ago. So like there was like 7 years or so that I toured, um, where I was an alcoholic and a drug addict, and it's impossible to manage your mental health in that regard because every day you're waking up with regret. Regret for how you acted the night before. Then you're thrown back into meeting a bunch of people, performing, being fearful of being judged by people when you're on stage, getting praise from people when internally you don't really feel that good. It's just a terrible like concoction for your mental health. So number one was getting sober. That's super important to me. Um, for me, like discipline helped me balance my mental health, like getting up super early before it's light outside, going to the gym, eating in a certain way. For me, discipline was super important for like me balancing my mental health. Discipline and being sober made me the most at peace that I've ever been in my life. And have made it to where I like really don't feel like I relate to the same depressed version of myself that I was so long ago. One of the struggles with tour is that like your schedule is thrown off. It's hard to get up before sunrise every day when you're performing till midnight and you're meeting fans till 2 a.m. and you're unloading and stuff. So part of it was that I had to learn to be flexible on the road and like not hyper judge myself because I'm guilty of that as a person, as an artist. Like I'm just the most critical of myself more than anything, and so in some ways that makes it easy for me to be an artist because it's easy for me to ignore other people's criticism like on the internet because I'm the most critical of myself. And so a part of it was on the road learning to like not be super critical of the changes in routine, to maintain as much discipline as I could. Like we still worked out when we were on this last tour. My sleep schedule was altered, but we stayed in the gym. And I've just the sobriety has made it easier to just listen to my own internal clock of like, okay, I know when I'm teetering on the edge of like not a mental breakdown. That sounds a little extreme, but just getting off track. And so I just prioritize alone time. Um, but I think eliminating like partying and drugs from the touring life makes it so much easier, because then I'm just really experiencing a lot of gratitude. Like, obviously the schedule is really hard, but I love meeting people that my music's impacted. I love performing. So I'm just filled with gratitude at those things. And I try to just be really grateful of the experience that I'm having, and then just, prioritize my alone time and recoup time. And then it becomes easier to balance.
Now, you've collaborated with some of the biggest names in music. I mean, what, of those collaborations that you've worked with, are there some artists that might have had a bigger influence on you where you were able to learn some new things that led to, okay, hey, this is a new direction I want to take my music, my art?
Well, I think that the biggest influences for me to especially get sober, and especially to think about the impact that I'm going to have as an artist, those honestly came from outside of music. Those came from mentors and men that I found online, because growing up I didn't have a lot of super positive male influence, like, just honestly, in my life. My family's mostly women. My dad obviously struggled with drug addiction and stuff. So I didn't have a ton of male role models growing up. And so the internet introduced me to a lot of there's a lot of voices out there, and you have to be picky of which ones that you choose and land on, because otherwise you'll land on, some people that aren't the best example all around. But I found, a couple on the internet that really impacted me: Wes Watson, Bedros Cooley, and different people that really pushed me to just be a standing example as a man. And I think that overflowed into my music. But as far as like artists that have just influenced me, period, like Yellow Wolf has been the biggest, friend and influence. In music, it's really hard to find people that you find genuine friendship with, because so much of the music industry is just like, hey, let's do a track together and act like we're cool. And then, when I don't need you anymore, I don't need you. And so much of the industry is just, it's business, and so you can't get friendship confused with business. But Yellow Wolf has been one of the few artists that I just genuinely have like a brotherhood with. And he's, you know, it's rare that a bigger artist reaches down, provides mentorship, opportunity, and things like that to an artist that's coming up, especially in rap. Like, it's just not as prevalent in the culture. And so Yellow Wolf, has guided me a lot. We did a whole album together. He's treated me like an equal when it comes to the business, with the music, which is so rare. He's brought me on tour. He's uplifted me. We talk on the phone all the time. He's just somebody that has a lot of great insight, and he's a true artist. Like, there's artists in the industry that I just don't consider. I consider them more performers than anything. And he is like me, a true artist to the core, where he doesn't just want to succeed anyway. He wants to do it in the way that's really genuine to him. And so we have a lot of conversations surrounding that. And he's always pushed me to go in this really genuine direction that is my own. And I'm appreciative of that.
So you dropped Cadillac Music on Friday, October 13th. What was
Yes,
your
sir.
process putting that album together?
So every album is kind of a different process. Like, I try not to like copy and paste how I approach music. I put out like almost over 20 albums if we're counting the like random mixtapes that I put out in high school. But on streaming platforms, it's like 15 or 16 albums. So I would get really bored of it if I approached every album the same. So everyone has a totally different process. With this one, I moved back to Florida at the end of last year. I've been on a 3-month tour, and I've missed my family, my mom, my nephew, and my fiance, and my friends are all over here. So I moved back to Florida at the end of last year, and I've been living in LA for about 5 years, just pursuing music. But I didn't have a lot of like deep, long lasting friendships in LA. Most of the people that I really care about, my family, are back here. So this year was just all about reconnecting and spending more time with people that I loved, and not being so work obsessed, which I was all I was in LA. And I actually ended up working a lot more and making things of more value, which is just cool to figure out in the process. So it was like moving back to Florida, really being around my friends. This whole album is produced by my brother, Anonymous. And so, like, at the end of last year, we put together a summit for independent artists called the Future of Artists Summit. It was like the first event of its kind. It was two independent artists putting on a seminar for other independent artists to just really teach them how to make an impact in the music industry and not we had no other agenda of like selling them to a publishing label or pushing them to some sort of label. It was really just in the best interest of the artist. That was our goal, and that is our goal for the next couple of years, is to perpetuate that message. And then simultaneously, while we were back and working on that, we were back making music together because we've made music over the years. But while I was living in LA and he was living here, it was just like via email or he'd come visit here and there. But we really got to be around each other. And so with this album, we didn't like just make it in a set couple of weeks, which I've done for other projects. This was really the focus of us for the last eight months. And so we make music certain nights we would just spend time with friends, certain nights we would just have fun. I wasn't hyper obsessed with just locking into the studio. It was a good balance of like living my life, connecting with people that are important, and then making music when the inspiration came. And so I just think this album's like really special in that regard because it is made over a stretched out time period, and it really is the result of these moments when like inspiration really hit us, and a couple of moments of like wading through being uninspired. But I'm just really proud of like how this one came together, and it's been a totally different process than any of the other projects.
So on your new album, Cadillac Music, you have a single on there, Dixie, that has a lot of significance and means a lot to you. Would you want to talk about
Yeah.
that for a minute?
Yeah, I mean, well, I've written so many records over the years, but this is probably by far my favorite song I've ever written. Since I lost my dad, I've made so many songs and references to my dad. I mean, it's pretty much present in every album that I have, but I haven't talked a lot about my mom. I think it was just easier for a while to write about my dad because it was such a potent, painful memory. But my mom in my life has like been this just saint. I couldn't have asked for a better mom. She is the driving force behind the type of person that I am. She grew up with a really hard life. She obviously lost her husband to suicide. She's grown up around drugs and abuse, and she's never used a drug in her life. She is one of the kindest people I've ever met, most compassionate. She doesn't have this chip on her shoulder from all the hard stuff that she's been through. And so she's really inspired me over the years. And so this record, Dixie, is me telling the story about, the lifestyle that I grew up in, and also my mom's history of what she grew up in, her perspective of seeing me, get signed to a label and go down this path of using drugs and losing her husband to suicide and all these things that she's been through, and how that was a big catalyst to me changing and getting sober. I say at the end that my mom has lost everyone that she loves to downers and uppers, never strong enough to kick it for her. I gotta be tougher. Vow to never take you through the rain or ever end up the same. Before I die, you're gonna be proud of me, mother. I love you. And it's just this story about, wanting to be better for the people in your life. And, my mom deserves all the praise in the world. And the music video that we shot that's out on YouTube, it's a performance art piece. It's actually her first time hearing the record. And so I'm performing for this empty auditorium. And then at the end of the video, you see that my mom is there, and we capture her real time reaction because it's actually her first time hearing the record. And it was a heavy day. Her and I cried for about 45 minutes after that clip, and you kind of see a little bit of us crying there, but we had to take a break for about 45 minutes after that shot. And so it's just a special piece of art to me. And if there's any song that I could ask somebody to go listen to that wants to get familiar with who I am and my story, it's that one, Dixie.
Now, you mentioned aside from writing music, you love poetry.
Love it.
Do you have anything that you'd like to share with us today?
Yeah, actually, I'd said that I wanted to read this one called "Watched Upon a Nameless Shore." I'm gonna read that, but then I'm gonna end it on a positive note too, and I have one more if that's okay with you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wrote this book. I've written two poetry books. One is called "Fear Does Not Belong Here," and the second one is called "Heaven Is a Place on Earth," and it's a three-part book. The first part is hell, the second part is purgatory, and the third part is heaven. And so the first part, hell, is a compilation of poems about the painful things that I've been through. And then purgatory is just a list of 100 pieces of life advice and perspective that I've gained over the years or that have helped me. And then the third part is heaven, which is more uplifting poetry about the light that I've seen in my life. My first poetry book was like all dark stuff. And so I just felt like it was important to, I don't know, push us in the right direction. So I'd like to read a poem from hell and a poem from heaven if I could.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
All right. So this first one is called "Washed Upon a Nameless Shore." And I'm not the best reader of my own poetry. I'm really good at writing it, but I'm not like a spoken word poet. All right, "Washed Upon a Nameless Shore." I've managed to whitewash all the blackest memories Dad left stained upon my childhood optimism. I reached for a blanket, noticing I had grabbed a telephone, calling your name once again to no response. Wrapping myself in a plastic cord, hoping to make a warm enough cocoon to survive the winter. A chrysalis if I believed this to be beautiful, but no. I'm an unsung moth. Skeletons painted on my back like those tattoos you see, humming to the sounds of my solitude. A song I have recreated 1,000 times on every instrument I have ever encountered. Minor chords making a home out of my ear. I tried to empty them at once, tilting my head repeatedly, and all I did was create waterfalls in my living room. Now the whole house is flooded, and I have to swim to bed each night, navigating my hallways like I'm miles from shore, using the moonlight as a compass, forever being swept over by waves of shadows. That is an ode to my father. Rest in peace. And then one of the poems from heaven is a letter to my nephew who is 5 years old right now. His name's Bentley, and I love him dearly. And this poem is called "To My Nephew with Infinite Love." My hope is that God will pollinate in you an infinite curiosity for the world. That when you look at the trees outside, there's a forest in your eyes, and you get lost on trails you made in a past life. A life where you thirsted and breathed and ran and lived. My hope is that when it rains, you store the sound in 1,000 jars so you can always taste the music of Mother restoring the things she loves. I hope it reminds you that love doesn't always look like sunshine, that for anything to live, so many things must die. So give thanks to your anonymous martyrs and feel loved, for God confesses his love for you daily if you are only quiet enough to listen, and perhaps you will be quiet enough to hear me in the distance calling you home.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank
I've
you.
never read poetry on anything, so this is the first.
That was beautiful, and you're not giving yourself enough credit. You read your poems very well.
All right,
It's
good.
awesome.
I want to read them and I want to speak live, but I've always been more comfortable writing them.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me, Chris.
One of the things that I like to kind of close each episode on is everything you've been through as a person, as an artist. What is your big piece of advice that you'd like to share to people listening?
I would say that the biggest thing that has been potent in my life lately is just that our pain is our gift, and that it's easy for us to look at the things that we go through and wonder why me, and feel like life shouldn't be this way. But one of the just interesting things that I've found in my experience is that the most painful things that I went through in my life were the biggest catalyst to purpose in my life. And so I think that anything that we go to, I mean, it's important to understand that everyone in the world is going through horrible things. I mean, you see what's going on in the Middle East right now, the mental health crisis in America. Everyone in the world is going through something difficult. And so pain isn't unique to us. You know, we're in our own universe, so it feels like that sometimes, but it's a natural human thing for us to have to bear terrible experiences. And I think that for me, all of the most painful ones that I went through, when I learned to address them head on, not numb myself out from them, not numb myself from them, they led to the biggest callings in my life. And so my mentor always says that our purpose is to heal what ails you and then give that away to the world. And so I think that that is my biggest takeaway, is that our pain is our gift, and that it's this thing that drives us into a deeper understanding of ourselves, a deeper empathy for people around us. And it's our job to try our best to heal that and then go help the other people in our life that are going through the same thing, because we're all going through something difficult.
Once again, Caskey, thank you so much for joining the Make an Impact podcast. And, we're going to keep following you, and definitely encourage everyone to listen to your music, follow you on social media. And I want to thank you for making an impact.
Chris, thank you for having me. It means a lot.